Trump's tariffs on Canada and Mexico are backfiring spectacularly, and now both countries are joining forces to fight back against his economic bullying. This isn't just trade policy anymore, it's become a full-scale economic war that's about to reshape North America forever. The magnitude of this crisis became crystal clear when Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney flew to Mexico City for an unprecedented summit with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum.
Minister Mark Carney is heading to Mexico this morning with the goal of expanding trade ties amid the U.S. trade war. Carney's two-day visit to Mexico City comes as both Canada and Mexico brace for the renegotiation of the continental trade deal with the U.S. Carney is expected to sign a strategic partnership agreement with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum. Senior government officials say the deal will cover infrastructure, trade, health, agriculture, emergency preparedness, and security. Let's bring in CTV's political commentator and the former NDP leader, Tom Mulcair. Tom, good morning to you. Good to see you.
Good to be with you, Marcia.
All right, so a quick trip to Mexico following a few days back in the House of Commons, which we will get to you. But give us your thoughts on this trip and what it says to you about the Prime Minister's priorities. How does this fall in line with his agenda?
There's an old saying that misery loves company, and to the extent that the Mexicans are stuck on one side of the border with Donald Trump and the total chaos of the current American administration, it's a good idea for Prime Minister Carney to meet his vis-a-vis, President Sheinbaum, of course, of Mexico, and to start laying out some ideas as to how we will together approach the renegotiation of the Canada-U.S.-Mexico trade deal. The consultations have already started, and we're heading to a redrafting next year, so it has to be done quickly. One of the interesting things is that early on, there were voices in Canada, just as Carney was coming on to replace Trudeau, there were some people starting to say, well, maybe we should start looking at the idea of a separate deal with the U.S. And I think that Carney has decided to be very clear with Mexico that we don't want a separate deal with the Americans, that we want to continue with what was the North American Free Trade Agreement, what became the Canada-U.S.-Mexico deal, and whatever the...
This wasn't your typical diplomatic photo opportunity. What transpired in Mexico City this week represents a fundamental shift in how America's neighbors are responding to Trump's aggressive trade policies. The two leaders signed what they're calling a comprehensive strategic partnership that goes far beyond simple trade agreements.
If it means helping to secure the canola industry. Based on the 340 people surveyed in Saskatchewan, that percentage rises to 68%. The survey question was part of a larger review examining several international trade issues.
But generally, yeah, what we've seen is that Canadians do typically have a pretty unfavorable view of China, but I think there's also a lot of concern about the economic effects of standing up to China, and that this is potentially one of those cases where it's like, okay, well, maybe the economic effects of putting these tariffs in place are not necessarily worth it.
Annual canola exports are worth billions of dollars for the prairie provinces, Saskatchewan producing more than half of Canada's canola crops. Saskatchewan's government and opposition have also expressed a desire to drop the EV tariffs if it brings relief for canola.
This is a call we've been making from day one here, that the province and the feds need to be working in tandem to end those tariffs that producers are paying.
The government of Saskatchewan says Premier Scott Moe's trade mission to...
This deal includes plans to build massive infrastructure projects, ports, rail corridors, and energy infrastructure, all designed to reduce dependence on the United States. They're also coordinating on security issues, environmental protection, and most importantly, presenting a united front against Trump's tariff threats. To understand how we got here, we need to look at Trump's disastrous tariff strategy. Back in February, Trump imposed devastating 25% tariffs on both Canada and Mexico, claiming it was about stopping fentanyl and illegal immigration. But here's what he didn't expect. Instead of cowering and begging for mercy, both countries decided to coordinate their response and fight back together. The meeting between Carney and Sheinbaum at the National Palace wasn't just diplomatic theater, it was a declaration of economic independence from Trump's America. These two leaders stood side by side and essentially told Trump, "We're not going to be bullied anymore." Sheinbaum made it crystal clear where Mexico stands, saying they would continue walking together with mutual respect and certainty that cooperation is the path to overcome any challenge. This is diplomatic language for "we're done playing Trump's games," but Carney's response was even more telling. the Canadian Prime Minister declared that North America is the economic envy of the world, precisely because of trade cooperation between Canada and Mexico, pointedly excluding the United States from that praise. That's not an accident. That's a direct shot at Trump's isolationist policies. Meanwhile, back in Ottawa, the Conservative opposition has been relentless in attacking his economic record.
There's a lot more debt is what there is, Mr. Speaker. A lot more debt than we ever imagined would be possible. This is a Prime Minister who said we'd have the fastest growing economy in the G7. We have the fastest shrinking economy in the G7. He said grocery prices would go down. They're going up faster than ever before. He promised to create jobs.
Pierre Poilievre delivered a scathing critique, listing Trump's broken promises, including the economy shrinking instead of growing fastest in the G7, rising grocery prices despite promises they'd fall, and high unemployment. He even used a clever analogy about free beer tomorrow signs at bars to illustrate how Trump's promises never materialize. Political analysts are noting that Carney has been establishing himself as the adult in the room when it comes to international relations.
Carney really established himself as the adult in the room, not only from the way that he presents himself, whether that's engaging with stakeholders or engaging with other, other folks like premiers around the table, but also from the policy perspective that he's bringing. And he's brought a really serious tone to Parliament or to the government, in general. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the House, whether or not the Conservatives are going to shift tactics. I think it's quite different engaging with Mark Carney than it was engaging with Mr. Trudeau. And it'll be interesting to see how that actually plays out with Pierre's first line of questioning.
Unlike the chaos and unpredictability of Trump's approach, Carney has engaged systematically with stakeholders and premiers, bringing a serious tone to Canada's response to the trade crisis. This methodical approach is paying dividends as Canada builds alliances that exclude the United States. The American response to this Canada-Mexico alliance has been telling. Last week, U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra tried to downplay the severity of the situation.
The U.S. ambassador to Canada was on the defensive in Halifax, accusing Canada of playing hardball when it comes to trade talks. Pete Hoekstra repeatedly told the Halifax Chamber of Commerce that Canada has it wrong, saying this isn't a trade war, but merely negotiations.
The cabinet's now saying that we're at war with America. That doesn't help, okay? That doesn't, an American opinion, okay? Maybe in Canada saying we're at war, maybe that's something that Canadians stand up and say, yes, 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 okay? We have an enemy. I don't think so. I know a little bit about Canada.
Hoekstra warned calling it a war is misleading and dangerous.
No, we're not at war. If the president thought he was at war with Canada, you'd see a whole different kind of relationship and trade negotiation.
Speaking at the Halifax Chamber of Commerce, he pushed back against Canadian office, aisles who've characterized the trade dispute as a war, arguing that framing it as warfare is counterproductive. But his warning that if Trump actually considered this a war, things would look drastically different, only served to highlight how badly the United States has mismanaged these relationships. Now here's where Trump's strategy gets really stupid. Both countries are preparing for the upcoming review of the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA, scheduled for next year. Instead of negotiating from a position of strength, Trump has managed to unite his two largest trading partners against him. Think about that for a moment. The United States' two biggest trading partners are now coordinating their strategies specifically to counter American pressure. The numbers tell the whole story of Trump's failure. Despite all his bluster about 25% tariffs, Canada has only 9% of its exports to the U.S. actually hit by tariffs, with an average rate of 21%. Mexico faces slightly higher exposure at 17% of exports, but that's still far from the economic devastation Trump promised to unleash. Why? Because both countries have been smart enough to structure their trade relationships to minimize Trump's damage. But here's the really embarrassing part for Trump. His own tariff policy is actually helping Canadian and Mexican businesses. Economic analysis shows that because Trump is charging even higher tariffs on China and other countries, Mexican and Canadian exporters are becoming more competitive in the U.S. market. Trump's tariffs are literally making North America stronger, just not in the way he intended. The energy sector provides a perfect example of Trump's miscalculation. Conservative House Leader Andrew Scheer has been particularly vocal about this.
No.
It seems like they're getting rid of half of those.
Yeah. They've refused to repeal the No More Pipelines bill. They've refused to repeal the shipping ban, which basically means only Canadian energy cannot be shipped off our western coast. Other countries' energy can go up and down the coast. Only Canadians can. They've refused to repeal the impact assessment regime that they built, which was designed to get to a no. They vetoed Northern Gateway. They layered on all kinds of rules and regulations on the energy sector. And as a result, tens of billions of dollars have fled into other countries. The United States has signed over deals worth over $750 billion on LNG alone.
But
that's something that Canada could have done, and then we wouldn't be talking about a massive contraction. So between the spending that's being increased,
we would still be talking about contraction given our dependence on the States.
We would have been able to diversify. Northern Gateway would have helped us diversify off of the American economy. Trudeau canceled that. Carney cheered for that. He cheered on and applauded Justin Trudeau for doing that. So Canada, after 10 years of Liberal government, is more dependent on the United States for our exports.
It's actually the same. It's 75% of our exports then, 75% of our exports now.
No, but when you consider what it could have been, I mean, Northern Gateway was a real opportunity to get Canadian energy into Asian markets.
But it lost in the courts.
No. Justin Trudeau vetoed that.
It lost in the courts
Gateway
decided, and then Trudeau decided not to fight it. He didn't appeal the decision from the court.
Well, you say tomato, I say tomato. Justin Trudeau had the ability to see that pipeline through. He did not want it. I remember his speech when he explained the reason why he did not want Northern Gateway to proceed, despite the fact that there were multiple partnerships agreements signed by First Nations communities along the way, despite the fact it would have opened up Asian markets. He also stacked the deck against Energy East, which would have taken...
He argues that Trump's anti-energy development policies have chased away billions in investment, blocked projects like the Northern Gateway pipeline that would have diversified Canada's economy away from U.S. dependence, and weakened Canada's fiscal capacity. These policies have ironically pushed Canada to accelerate partnerships with Mexico and other nations. The USMCA exemptions that both countries have negotiated mean that the vast majority of their trade with the United States remains tariff-free. Over 85% of Canada-US trade and 84% of Mexico-US trade continues without Trump's punitive tariffs. Meanwhile, American consumers are paying the price through higher costs on everything from energy to manufactured goods. Trump's escalation strategy has been equally disastrous. When Canada imposed retaliatory tariffs, Trump threw a tantrum and raised tariffs from 25% to 35%. When that didn't work, he threatened even more increases. But instead of forcing Canada to submit, this just gave Prime Minister Carney more ammunition for his political campaign against Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, who Trump foolishly endorsed. The timing of this Mexico-Canada alliance couldn't be worse for Trump. Public consultations on the future of the USMCA began this week, setting the stage for next year's formal review. Instead of entering these negotiations with compliant partners desperate for American market access, Trump now faces a coordinated bloc of countries that have spent months preparing their defense against his economic aggression. Carney and Sheinbaum were very explicit about their strategy. They're not competing with each other for Trump's favor anymore. As Carney put it, "We will move forward together." That's diplomatic speak for, we're done letting Trump play us against each other. This represents a fundamental shift in North American trade dynamics that Trump clearly didn't anticipate. But the real disaster for Trump is what this means for American workers and businesses. The automotive industry, which depends heavily on integrated North American supply chains, is already feeling the pain. Trump had to carve out special exemptions for auto imports because his own tariffs were destroying American manufacturing jobs. Energy markets are in chaos because Trump's tariffs on Canadian energy exports are driving up costs for American consumers. Even his own supporters in energy-producing states are starting to question whether this trade war is worth the economic damage. Meanwhile, Mexico and Canada are using Trump's tariffs as an opportunity to diversify their economies away from American dependence. Mexico has launched a Made in Mexico campaign to reduce reliance on American products. Canada is fast-tracking major infrastructure projects designed to open new trade routes that bypass the United States entirely. Trump claimed his tariffs would bring manufacturing jobs back to America, but the opposite is happening. Mexican manufacturing is booming because Trump's policies have made it more attractive for companies to produce goods there rather than deal with the uncertainty of American trade policy. Canadian energy exports are finding new markets in Asia and Europe, reducing their dependence on American buyers. The legal challenges to Trump's tariffs are mounting as well. The Court of International Trade has already declared some of Trump's tariff orders invalid as contrary to law. Canada has initiated formal dispute resolution proceedings with the World Trade Organization, arguing that Trump's tariffs violate international trade agreements. Mexico is preparing its own legal challenges. Trump's use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to impose these tariffs is being challenged in multiple courts as an abuse of presidential authority. The law was designed for genuine national emergencies, not trade disputes manufactured for political purposes. Even Trump's own economic advisors are reportedly concerned about the long-term damage these tariffs are causing to American economic relationships. The alliance between Canada and Mexico that emerged from this week's meeting represents exactly the kind of coordinated international response that trade wars are supposed to prevent, not create. Looking ahead to next year's USMCA review, Trump has managed to put himself in the worst possible negotiating position. Instead of dealing with two separate countries that might compete for American favor, he's now facing a united front of partners who have spent months coordinating their strategy and building alternative economic relationships. The broader implications of this Canada-Mexico alliance extend far beyond trade policy. Both countries are coordinating on security issues, energy policy, and immigration, areas where they previously relied heavily on American leadership. Trump's aggressive approach has pushed them to develop independent capabilities and relationships that reduce their dependence on the United States. This is particularly significant given the global context of rising authoritarianism and economic nationalism. While Trump has been alienating America's closest neighbors and most reliable trading partners, other countries have been building stronger relationships with Canada and Mexico. European Union officials are already reaching out to both countries about expanded trade and security cooperation. The economic data makes Trump's failure impossible to ignore. American households are paying an average of nearly $1,300 more per year because of Trump's tariffs, money that comes directly out of family budgets to fund Trump's trade war. Meanwhile, Canadian and Mexican exporters are finding new markets and building more resilient supply chains that don't depend on American consumers. Trump's promise to use tariffs as leverage to force better deals has backfired completely. Instead of gaining negotiating power, he's created a situation where America's two largest trading partners are actively working together to reduce their dependence on the American market. The meeting between Carney and Sheinbaum this week wasn't just about trade policy. It was about fundamentally reshaping the economic relationships that have defined North America for decades. The fact that both leaders felt confident enough to publicly declare their intention to work together, despite Trump's threats of retaliation, shows just how much the balance of power has shifted. Trump's trade war was supposed to demonstrate American strength and force other countries to accept unfavorable terms. Instead, it has revealed the limits of American economic leverage and pushed key allies into a defensive alliance against American policy. This Canada-Mexico partnership, forged in response to Trump's economic aggression, represents a new model for how countries can resist American economic bullying while building stronger relationships with each other. As we head into the formal USMCA review process next year, Trump will be facing not just two separate countries looking for the best deal they can get from America, but a coordinated bloc of partners who have already demonstrated their willingness to stand up to American pressure. The economic and political consequences of this shift will be felt for years to come, regardless of who occupies the White House. Trump's tariff strategy hasn't just failed to achieve its stated objectives. It has actively undermined American economic interests and created exactly the kind of anti-American alliance that previous presidents worked for decades to prevent. The meeting in Mexico City this week may be remembered as the moment when Trump's trade war officially backfired, creating a stronger, more independent North America that no longer automatically defers to American economic leadership.